Hi everyone, welcome to the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Speaker Series. This is our fourth and final one for the year. We have the lovely Alli Scott with us, and for anyone who's been following, we're going to be announcing next year's series very soon. So Alli, if you'd like to take the room, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say on accessibility and wellbeing at festivals.
Okay, so I'm Alli, Alli Scott, and I've kind of come to you guys through DHP, I believe, who I've done some work with at Bearded Theory this year, who are a lovely bunch, and it's nice to make some extra connections out of them. So I've kind of been asked to come and talk to you really about accessibility, wellbeing, things like that at festivals, which is where my experience sits really. I've been in the business 25 years this year. So it feels like a good portion of my lifetime has been spent chasing people around fields or all around the country. I've also worked over the last 20 years quite excessively with volunteering, and have done a lot of work over the last 10 years especially on looking at the well-being of event crews. So technical crews, stage crews, site crews, things like that, and looking at their accessibility needs and their well-being needs, and are they being met by the industry, which frankly 10 years ago they weren't, but I think and I hope we're in a much better position now. So Ian's got control of my slideshow, so I'm going to ask him if he could do the next slide, which I feel very privileged to say. So yeah, I thought I'd kind of kick off by kind of explaining a little bit about what I do and what my years look like so far this year. So this year's been a very full year. Everything from Glastonbury and Green Man are my kind of two biggest bookends of the year, and I kind of squash everything else in around them. So obviously I work with Stand and Calling, Bearded Theory, a couple of small events over here in Wales. So Big Love is the main one I do, the smaller one, and then obviously Green Man is the bigger one in Wales. And this year I've done quite a few jobs through a company called Accessible Events Limited, where we have gone in and done more kind of corporate accessibility work. So we worked for the Coronation down in London, and we did the Star Wars Expo in London as well, and a couple of other events around the country. So you can see from the list that I do lots of different jobs, but accessibility and crew wellbeing is really where my experience and my passion is. And it's everything from helping a volunteer team of over 1,000 people to make sure that everyone who's got an accessibility need is catered for, right the way to the other end of just managing rotas and making sure people are in the right place at the right time, doing a job that they are going to succeed at. So it's a bit of everything really. This year, for the first time, I did quite a bit of site production work, which I haven't done for a few years, which was lovely, but I brought quite a bit of the accessibility and the wellbeing back into the site offices, which was a bit of a surprise to a lot of site crews who generally turn up on site and try and build an event on their own. So to have a team looking after them, I think to them was a bit of a surprise actually, but it was a very lovely surprise. So if we want to do another slide, if that's all right, Ian. So I did want to kind of give you some numbers because everyone loves a bit of statistics. So these numbers come from Scope, and this is this year's kind of tax office numbers. So they're looking at the moment at claiming that 5.1 million disabled people are in work in the UK, which is a huge amount of people with a disposable income who want to go to festivals and events and gigs and shows that you put on. To assume that there aren't any disabled customers is a huge problem. There's a massive amount of disabled customers, but when we say disabled, in my terms, in working with events, I mean everything from ADHD right the way through to complex medical and physical and mobility needs. And especially at places like Glastonbury, I do work with people who might present to us with an ASD disorder, so an autistic spectrum disorder, which to them gives them issues with crowds, right the way through to somebody who needs a 3-to-1 nursing care for the full time that they're on site. So you can see that the word disabled is a massive spectrum, and especially in terms of what you guys do in working with musicians, a disability is not always something you can see. It's not always something that can be quantified, as in I can't walk up steps or I need a ramp. It might be as simple as I need you to give me instructions in a written form. I need you to make sure that I have a physical ticket, not an email, or the other way around, because a lot of people prefer to physically have a ticket in their hands and hand it over. There's lots of different things that, in terms of accessibility at events, that we cater for, but we try to cater for everyone. And if somebody presents to us and says, I have a specific need, or my child has a specific need, and we're not already covering it, then that for us is a bit of a flag. We have to look at why we're not already covering that need and what we can do in the future. So there's never any kind of wrong answer when somebody comes and says, I don't know if this is the right thing to say to you, in terms of kind of coming and giving us a need that they have. They're all valid, and we try and cover as much as we can in every event. Obviously, you have budgets, you have cost, you have physical capacity, but we try and cover everything. And we, as a team, and the people I work with and some of the companies I work with, I like to get event organisers to look at these numbers regularly throughout their career, so that they get an understanding of how many disabled people there are wanting to come to their events. So do you want to jump to the next slide, Ian? So yeah, accessibility in the UK, it's a great place to be at the moment, I have to admit. I've been in the industry a long time. I started working in festivals 25 years ago and have seen such a massive change. It's a great change to see, and it's a great thing to be part of. A part of me is a little bit sad that we weren't better at it 25 years ago, but I'm very glad that we're better at it now. The UK has become a bit of a leading light internationally in accessibility. Lots of different countries like to claim that they're the best at certain things, but having worked with international teams this year, it's very clear that the UK has a different approach to accessibility. We don't add on accessibility at the end of an event, we embed it from day one. We start to look at our customers' journey, from looking at a website to decide what gig they're going to book to go to how they're going to get to us. We look at the whole journey in the UK. Partly because we've had the government support to do that, and there's been a lot of work done by people like the DWP to make sure that everything joins up. You know, we're still not 100%, but we're getting much closer to it. Some countries around the world feel that they can put on an event, add a couple of ramps and a viewing platform, and if anybody comes who needs their help, then they'll give it. But we kind of, in the UK, look at it from a very different perspective. We look at it from, are any of our managers or any of our main event organisers disabled? What have they got to tell us about lived experience? What have they got to tell us about how they come to an event and how they choose to come to an event? And we kind of look at it from day one. And I've done a lot of work this year with a couple of degree courses around the country, trying to kind of talk to students about how embedding accessibility from the very first idea is not a bad thing. In fact, it adds value. It adds a lot of value to your company, to your event, to your gig, even as small as one band in a pub. If you're thinking about, well, where are my tickets being sold? Can somebody come in and get them if they're not able to use the stairs? You know, so it's thinking about the whole journey. And accessibility within festivals particularly is now at a point where I think a lot of people can choose to go to any festival now and expect to have some support and expect to have some very well thought out support in the UK. Obviously I work with Glastonbury, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, in the UK, but we don't have the biggest number of accessible customers by far. Proportionally, Glastonbury is very low. There are other events in the UK that do a better job and have a much higher proportion of customers coming to them with disabilities. In fact, WOMAD, I think, now tops the scale at having something along the lines of 15%, whereas Glastonbury, we're looking at 2 or 3%. So it's the size of an event isn't always the indicator for how accessible it is. So when I say accessible, obviously with a greenfield camping festival, or even the non-camping ones, accessibility generally is around getting around a site, getting into a site, and how mobile you can be around a site. But with things like quiet spaces and sensory rooms becoming now the industry standard, we're adding lots of different things every year to our accessibility package. So obviously we have BSL signers, we have written descriptive packages at all of our viewing platforms, so a customer can read through what the run through of the lineup is going to be. If there's any changes, it gets written into those packages. So a lot of people now access music festivals with accessibility needs that have got nothing to do with walking, wheelchairs or platforms. A lot of it now is ASD and sensory disorders. So it's giving people that option to have some time out of the crowd, giving people an option to have somewhere they can come down from an overstimulated point to something that they're more comfortable with, and allowing them like decompression space and time, which is really valuable for a lot of people. And we're actually seeing a lot of performers asking for that kind of support as well. So last year we had 3 spaces at Glastonbury that were dedicated to sensory overload and decompression. Next year we're looking at 6 and 1 backstage. So you can see how fast it's growing. That's gone from 0 to possibly 7 in 2 years. So it's a fast moving area of accessibility. And we're also seeing a huge amount of customer requests for BSL signing interpretation at stages as well. It's gone from having 1 signer maybe doing the 3 headline acts at a main stage to having a BSL signer for the entire lineup at all stages at all times. So that's the flip in the industry. The industry has gone from asking us to do a little bit to doing all of it in the space of 2 or 3 years, mainly because they're being questioned by activism groups about why they aren't doing it in the first place. So there's been a very fast kind of turnover in that area, which is a great thing as far as I'm concerned, because if you've ever been to a festival and caught sight of a signer or watched a sign interpreter, it's the most amazing 10 minutes. Honestly, having watched Guns N' Roses this year being sign interpreted on the main stage at Glastonbury was phenomenal, and I didn't see anything of what was going on the stage. I watched the signer entirely. It's a great moment when you kind of think this is so far from where we were 20 odd years ago, where you'd be lucky to be able to get across the site in a wheelchair, and even then like you just wouldn't do it because it would just be too exhausting. So accessibility in the UK, I feel, is in a really good place. Obviously, if you talk to different industries, different professionals, you'll get a different answer. But I think across the events world, it's looking good. And I'm really hoping that across the performers world, it's looking good as well. I'm doing a lot of work with managers and promoters to make sure that their performers are getting what they need in terms of accessibility. And a lot of performers, I don't know what the numbers are, but I'm finding a lot of performers with autistic spectrum disorders, ADHD, ADD, things like that, that add to their performance. It makes them who they are, but it does often throw up problems when they want to get out of a backstage area to a bar to get the one drink that they know that pub serves that they want to drink and get back again. It can be too much for some people. So that is an accessibility need. Does a performer need somebody to be kind of covering that kind of stuff for them if they are really struggling at that point with something like ADHD? There's lots of questions, I think, about accessibility that different industries need to ask the people they're working with. So in your terms, if you need to ask your performers, do you need to ask your venues? Do you need to be asking events, what is the accessibility package? Or do you leave that up to your performers? You know, well, there's a growing movement now that performers and artists are pushing back to their management teams and saying, this is for you to deal with. I'm doing my bit, I'm doing the work, I'm turning up and performing on stage. I'm asking you as my managers to make sure there's accessibility for me. So I think in the past, it's been very much on the performers and the artists to deal with it themselves. But that, again, is another flip in the industry that it's turned around almost 360 and it's going the opposite direction now, especially through chatting with people like Bob and Sam at DHP. They found that with different venues that they are being approached by managers a lot more now about what they can do for accessibility, which is fantastic. I'm really pleased about that. I know it adds extra work, but it shows that the conversation's going in the right direction. Ian, do you want to, I think this is the last one now, possibly. Yes, right. I thought I would show you this because it's one of my favourite pictures. The chap in the high vis down at the front is Dave. He's one of our most experienced volunteers at Glastonbury. He's been volunteering with the accessibility team for 35 years. And it was him and his friend at the time, who's now wife, who came up with the idea of viewing platforms about 40 years ago and approached Michael Eavis and said, do you know what we need? We need to be slightly higher up so that we can see. And hence the viewing platforms were brought in. That picture was taken about 6 hours before Elton John came on stage. And the crowd was so full at that point that we had to close that platform. And that platform holds about 150 to 200 people. And it's one of our smaller ones. We had to close the platform because it was so full. So one of the reasons why I love that picture, because it really shows that the demand, it really shows that people want to be in a really good position to see a really good gig, band, event, whatever. They get there early, they know the space constraints, so they turn up, they know what they want. And kind of throwing accessibility in as an afterthought is a really bad idea, because these guys have planned what they wanted to do and they got there early and they got space. Thankfully I got space for them as well, but it really shows the crowd. It shows how full it can be. It shows how determined and dedicated a lot of our customers are to get to see the band. There you go. There's a bit of a misunderstanding in amongst the accessibility customer crowd, that a lot of accessibility customers feel that because they are one of our customers, they should be able to rock up anywhere across an event site and get an accessible space and sit at the front and see the band that they want to see. And I spend a lot of my time as the arrivals manager at Glastonbury talking to them while they're waiting in the queue and explaining that they still have to get there on time or before time, just the same as anybody else has to. If they want to get down the front to see whatever band, you've got to get there early enough to get down the front. Just because you're using accessibility and you're using the platforms doesn't mean you get a late pass to come in 10 minutes before the Foo Fighters come on stage, or whoever it is that's performing. It's a real moment in people's minds. You can almost see it happening when they're standing in the queue and the click happens and they go, oh, so I get a platform space, but only if I actually get there and if I do the work to get there early. You're not just going to give me a space because I'm an accessible customer. That moment when that clicks with people is a really interesting moment in my work, because it kind of validates what we do. We're giving you an accessible option, but we're not giving you a free pass to the whole event. You still have to physically make sure you're there and get in before everyone else does. So yeah, so that picture is a real kind of eye-opener for a lot of people, and they think that the platforms are going to have 2 or 3 people on them. It's going to be nice and quiet, and it doesn't happen. At every event I've worked at this year, we've had to close platforms early. We've had to ask people to leave. We've had to, on safety grounds, we've had to move wheelchairs and mobile scooters out of the platform in order to give people standing space. So we are oversubscribed is kind of where I'm going with this. So that you can kind of understand the oversubscription. But on top of that, it's a great picture of Dave, who never gets in front of the camera anywhere. But yeah, so I kind of have had a long career with accessibility. As I said, I've been in the business about 25 years now. And when I first started, you might get one phone call from somebody asking if they can park a bit closer, or you might get somebody who asks for the flattest space to put their tent. I certainly wasn't helping anybody to fix their wheelchair and get across the site in a shuttle bus 20 years ago. That just wasn't happening. We just weren't getting customers come to us at major events presenting with real accessible needs. But we are now, which is it's a wonderful thing to see that everybody is represented at big events, but it's even better to see that everyone's represented at small events. And even when I go to my local venues and go to a gig with 200 people, I'm really pleased that they have put on accessibility provision. They've given someone a space. They've made sure tickets are available over the phone if someone can't get to a venue. You know, they've really thought about everything in the same way a major festival has to. But in some ways they do it a bit better because they're such a small team. They can really understand what they've got to do. I mean, at events like Glastonbury, just the accessibility team is nearing 200 members of staff. So that's a large team to manage. And we're just accessibility within a huge machine that is a massive event. But then other events I've worked on as well only have 1 or 2 people. And they are the ones that I'm worried about. When they only have 1 or 2 people in a massive office working on accessibility, it can be too much and the workload needs to be spread out a bit more. So there's lots of things still to do, and we've come a long way. But I'm in a really good position to see a whole range of accessibility provision being done across the site now. And yeah, if anybody has any really specific questions or anything a bit vague that they want to know about different events, feel free if we want to go for questions. That's all of my slides.